So the new stuff is cool in that it adds a lot of flexibility. You can see I always wanted to get rid of the VCV Rack delay, or at least do something fancier for my effects bank, because I still have things set up as samples in this group, and then the beat or the drums in this group, and the effects in this group, which used to just be the delay, and then the oscillator envelope, the macro oscillator in this bank. And that's very much the same, except I swapped out the delay for the texture synthesizer from Audible Instruments. I was concerned it was going to use more DSP than it does. It's not bad at all. And it's granular, and I'm able to freeze samples, and that way create textures that stay independent, whether it's the tone or the actual note that's being played. So you do get more of a three-body system where there's drums, bass, and like a more melodic interpretation of the sample. And then I've also added, and I might have not mentioned this in the previous video or gotten too in depth about it, but I added the kick-all from Bifico, if I'm saying that right. And that is in there so that I get some sustain on the low end and some variety to the bass. So those two elements really kind of flesh out the two new textures, or like things that are going on at once. The MIDI is kind of hard to get into without getting in the weeds, but I do have some notes on the patch that show what does what that I have to update, and I will have those accompanying this video. But the majority of everything's really similar. I'm gonna start by just bringing in that macro oscillator, and you can select that with one of the knobs, and then this knob, the second one over, selects the sample. I should also mention that I've been making sure that this patch doesn't crash, and that's because sometimes it just doesn't like a certain sample. I can't really find a rhyme or reason to it, but it happens on both Windows and Mac, and with the Lomas sampler. I wanted to try out all the other samplers that they had in the VCV Rack library and kind of test and see if there's a better option, but I also don't really have enough time to really start from the ground up that way, and I'm really used to the behavior of the Lomas sampler. It works really well right now in this patch, so I'm sticking with it. It just broke a lot before. It doesn't break as much now. So that's selecting our samples, and then this third knob is the octave of both the samples and the macro oscillator. It'll change, as well as the kick-all. So if I move that, you can see that and hear it pretty easily. And then the same goes with the samples. So the fourth one over is the tempo. I've retuned the ranges to these, if I didn't mention that. The Korg Control Editor app, and why I was using it and using it with the Nano Key, was because it was, well, it was my only option, or the one I could find for my old Mac, but also I can really change on a granular level a lot of these settings, and that includes the range. You know, like let's say a CC value can be anywhere between 0 and 127. I can set that to something else. That's made it so, setting the values and how dramatic things change on the touchpad or on the tempo, I have them set to ranges that are within reason and make sense to have. It will potentially crash if I set the value for the tempo too high. This has been a process of trying to control chaos, and I'm trying to control chaos as much as possible, but still have it be kind of chaotic. And that was one of my ways of mitigating that. All right, so next knob. This is these next two are the filter envelopes for the acid filter envelopes, the volt envelopes, and that's for the macro oscillator and the samples. So the samples, you can't hear them now because I haven't turned up the filter. And then this guy, number 5, is a little bit special in that it's still tethered to two different parameters, one being the oscillator volume. So oscillator volume, but if I turn this all the way down and then bring up the sample volume, right now you're hearing that whole sample. You can see it in the upper left hand corner. It's playing through the whole sample and it's looping. I can set it to one shot if I want, but I'm going to leave it on loop. But this also affects the random reset probability. So when I turn this up, you start to hear the sample start over. And that's so that if you have a longer sample, I want to have as much availability to choose what part of a sample is going to be the main stage sample, the sample that's getting the most playback, how long the length of that sample is, whether you can loop it, as well as the how far it plays into the sample. And that is what the random reset probability basically does. In addition to that, that random reset value is being sent to the kick-all, and that creates the kind of basic kick sounds and some of the longer sustain on some of the kicks. When I go into certain gestures, that's because you get more consistency, and it's interesting how many things I can get to get controlled by one knob. These are all, I'm thinking about all these things in a singer-songwriter production way. I wanted to make sure that when you turn this knob all the way up, you aren't stuck with the oscillator being really loud. You can have a mute button to turn it off. Some of these choices are being made conscientiously and are being built upon for the actual physical prototype and in anticipation of the hardware. So that's where the sample starts, and if the sample's set to loop, you get more flexibility out of it, as in you can cause the repetition of the cycle of the sample playing. That can be so fast that it creates its own frequency. And now the 8th knob controls the granular texture synthesizer, and it changes the position and density. And a lot of the variables are impacted by the gesture control. You can still see that a lot of stuff lights up. Depending, and if it goes red, it's because the pitch shift is what's affecting it. And if it's just gonna turn really bright hot green, it's usually the mod wheel, which is the y-axis. So that's where I'm getting most of my gestural input. And yeah, so I'm gonna. Oh, and the other thing is I want to play back the sample. So you can see, and I've been wrestling with this for a while, that the sample doesn't stay the same what's happening is on the 1 or the downbeat, it is taking the envelope filter from the volt drum kick, which is right here. It's going into this data compander by Hetrick, and this is basically just taking that envelope signal, which normally it's longer, and it affects and has a more dramatic effect. This makes a lot of consistency, and it kind of only uses 2 to 3 samples most of the time, and that creates this consistency. Now I'm going to get into doing some actual playing around. You're going to hear a lot more of the granular synthesis going on and me playing around with that. That's the newest addition, but I'm going to be showing that off a little bit, and hopefully you can hear those 3 independent like bodies of where the sample's going to. One being the drums and the transients in the drums. And then the sample, how it plays back, is now, it's got more space and harmony to it because of the granular synthesis. And then the sub, the kick, that's coming when I do certain gestures. The only thing going into the granular synthesizer, the texture synthesizer, sorry. The only thing, but it's a granular synth. The only thing really going into it is the sample. So, now you're hearing the one I just changed it to. Here's Jocko. Here's the granular. Here's the tonal note, the oscillator. Here are the drums. that's the way you do it, I guess. Hopefully that's a good demo. I feel like it took me a second to get there, but half of the time it was because I didn't have my DAW set to follow the VCV Rack plugin tempo. So, thanks for watching. I also might have had my noise canceling on some of my mic input. So, if you hear stuff drop out, I'm sorry. Thanks for watching. All right, peace.